gathered nobles. The room was filled with the highest-ranking warriors and rulers of the empire, all watching the event with amusement. Today, Lord Sealer, one of the most powerful warlords in the galaxy, was giving away his daughter, not as a princess to a noble house, but as a gift to a human. The thought made many of the Xilari laugh. Humans were considered weak, inferior, and unworthy in the eyes of the Dominion. The Xilari were an ancient species, their psionic powers allowing them to control minds, move objects with their thoughts, and dominate lesser races. Risa, however, was born without these abilities. Among her people, she was considered useless. And now she was being sent away like an unwanted object. Captain Elias Voss, Lord Sealer said, his deep voice echoing in the chamber, "You have fought well in the war against the Kithel raiders. As a reward, the Dominion recognizes your efforts. I offer you my daughter as a sign of goodwill between our species." A tall, broad-shouldered man stepped forward. Captain Elias Voss wore the dark uniform of the Terran fleet, his expression unreadable. Unlike the Xilari, his species had no natural gifts, no psionics, no advanced evolution. Yet in only a few decades, humans had spread across the stars, earning both fear and respect. Their strength came not from power, but from determination, intelligence, and resilience. Elias's gaze moved to Risa. She stood still, dressed in traditional Xilari robes, her long silver hair braided behind her. Her posture was straight, but he could see the tension in her shoulders. He had heard of her, the useless daughter of Lord Sealer, the disappointment of the Dominion. But looking at her now, he didn't see weakness. He saw someone who had been judged unfairly. One of the Xilari nobles chuckled. "Do humans even know what to do with a Xilari woman?" he mocked. The others laughed. Elias remained calm. He didn't react to their taunts. Instead, he turned to Lord Sealer and asked, "Does she agree to this?" The hall fell silent. No one had expected this question. Among the Xilari, a daughter had no right to choose. She was property of her father until she was married off or discarded. Lord Sealer narrowed his eyes. "Her opinion does not matter," he said coldly. "She is yours now." Elias ignored him and looked directly at Risa. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice was steady, but there was no mockery in it. No cruelty, just curiosity. Risa hesitated. No one had ever asked her this before. She had spent her entire life being told she was worthless, that she had no place among her people. Now, a human, a species her kind considered primitive, was asking for her choice. She lifted her head slightly and met his gaze. "I do not wish to stay here," she admitted softly, "but I do not know what awaits me with you." Elias nodded. "Fair enough." He turned back to Xillar. "I'll take her." Lord Sealer didn't care about the details. He simply gestured for the guards to bring Risa forward. She stepped towards Elias, her heart pounding as she left behind the only home she had ever known. She didn't know if this was an escape or a different kind of prison. But something about Elias Voss's calm, steady presence made her think, perhaps this was not the end, but the beginning. As they left the hall, the Xilari nobles laughed behind them. To them, it was a joke. But they had no idea that today, a legend was beginning. Risa sat quietly inside the Valkyrie, the powerful Terran warship that now carried her far away from the Xilari Dominion. The ship's engines hummed softly, filling the air with a steady vibration. She kept her hands folded in her lap, staring at the cold metal walls of the cabin where Captain Elias Voss had brought her. It was small, nothing like the luxurious chambers of the Xilari nobles, but it was clean and comfortable. She was alone. No guards watching her. No telepathic voices whispering in her mind, reminding her of her weakness. For the first time in her life, she felt free. But freedom was also terrifying. The door slid open with a quiet hiss, and Elias stepped inside. He carried a small metal tray with food, something that smelled warm and unfamiliar. He placed it on the table near her. "You haven't eaten," he said simply. Risa hesitated. Back in the Dominion, meals were silent affairs, and servants brought only what was dictated by the rules of her station. She looked at the tray, some kind of roasted protein, vegetables, and a strange golden bread. It was not what she was used to, but hunger gnawed at her stomach. She picked up the fork slowly and took a small bite. It was good. Risa stood silently in the grand hall of the Xelari Dominion, her golden eyes lowered as her father, Lord Sealer, addressed the. Elias sat across from her, watching her with calm curiosity. He wasn't like the Xelari nobles. They looked at her with either disgust or pity. But he simply observed. After a moment, he spoke again. "You don't have to stay locked in here. You can move freely around the ship." Risa blinked. "I can." Elias leaned back in his chair. "I'm not your jailer, Risa. You're not a prisoner here." She lowered her eyes, confused. "Then, what am I?" Elias exhaled, as if considering his words. "That's up to you." She looked up sharply. "What do you mean?" "You've spent your life being told what you are," he said, his voice steady but not unkind. "Weak, worthless, a disappointment. But humans don't believe in that kind of thinking. We don't let others decide our worth. We prove it ourselves." His words hit her harder than she expected. The Xelari had never given her the chance to prove anything. She had been judged from birth. But here, it was different. Elias stood up. "Come with me." She hesitated for only a second before rising to follow him. The hallways of the Valkyrie were nothing like the grand palaces of the Dominion. The ship was built for war, not beauty. But there was something alive about it. Humans walked through the corridors, speaking casually, laughing, arguing. There was no rigid order like in the Dominion, no silent, obedient soldiers or noble elites looking down on others. And yet, there was discipline. Every person she passed had a purpose. Engineers worked on repairs, officers studied tactical data, pilots ran simulations. They all moved with determination. They did not need psionics. They did not need bloodline status. They had something else. Elias led her to a large room where a group of humans were engaged in combat training. They sparred with each other, fists and bodies moving in swift, controlled motions. Some used weapons, blunt staffs or small blades, while others relied only on their fists. Risa watched in fascination. The Xelari relied on psionics in battle, using telekinetic force and mental domination. But these humans fought with strategy, skill, and sheer willpower. "Ever trained before?" Elias asked. She shook her head. "No, I was not allowed." Elias gestured toward the sparring area. "Now you are." Risa hesitated. I don't know how." "That's the point of training," Elias said with a small smirk. "Come on." She followed him onto the mat. A human soldier, a tall woman with short brown hair, stepped forward. "I'll be your partner," she said, giving Risa a respectful nod. The next hour was unlike anything Risa had ever experienced. The first few times, she was knocked down easily. But the humans didn't mock her. They didn't call her useless. They simply helped her back up and told her to try again. She learned. She learned how to move her body, how to anticipate attacks, how to strike back. She learned that strength was not just power, but persistence. By the end of the session, sweat dripped down her forehead. Her muscles ached, and her breath was heavy. But for the first time in her life, she felt something new. Pride. Elias clapped her on the shoulder. "Not bad for a first try." Risa looked at him, something shifting inside her. Perhaps she was not useless after all. Perhaps this was just the beginning. Days turned into weeks aboard the Valkyrie, and Risa found herself adapting to the human way of life. It was different from the Xelari Dominion. No strict hierarchy, no silent obedience to powerful nobles, no fear of psionic control. Here, everyone had a purpose, and everyone earned their place. She trained every day, learning human combat techniques. She wasn't the strongest or the fastest, but she refused to give up. Each time she was knocked down, she got back up. Her body ached from the intense drills, but for the first time in her life, she felt alive. Still, there was something missing. Even as she trained, even as she fought beside these humans, she knew she wasn't like them. She had been raised in a world of cold expectations, judged for something she had no control over. The Xilari had cast her aside because she lacked psionic power. But even here, among humans, what was she? She had no strength, no special skills. Was she truly useful, or was she just pretending? One day, an emergency call came through the ship's communication system. "Captain, we're receiving a distress signal from a human outpost near the Thalrex Nebula. They're under attack." Elias's face hardened. "Thal Raiders." "No, it's the Xilari." A cold chill ran down Rice's spine. The Xilari rarely attacked human territories directly. This was a message. "They must have heard about Risa," one of the officers muttered. "They don't like that she's with us." Elias didn't hesitate. "Prepare for combat. Helm, set course for the outpost. Maximum speed." The Valkyrie jumped into hyperspace. Risa clenched her fists. She had spent her whole life watching the Xilari dominate weaker species, using their psionic abilities to control and conquer. And now, they were coming for her. For the first time, she wasn't the one being abandoned. She was the one being fought for. The battle began as soon as they arrived. The Xilari warships hovered above the burning human outpost, their sleek silver hulls glowing with psionic energy. The human defenders were barely holding on, their ground forces pinned down by Xilari warriors who used their minds to crush opposition. The Valkyrie unleashed a barrage of firepower, forcing the Xilari fleet to engage. Meanwhile, Elias and his best soldiers, including Risa, boarded dropships to reinforce the human forces on the ground. The landing zone was chaos. Explosions rocked the battlefield, and humans fought desperately against Xilari warriors whose telekinetic attacks threw them aside like dolls. Risa gritted her teeth as she saw a Xilari warrior lift a human soldier into the air with his mind and slam him against a wall. This was what she had been raised to believe. Psionics were absolute. Humans were fighting with everything they had, but against psionic attacks, they were at a disadvantage. Risa's blood burned. She had spent her whole life being told she was nothing because she lacked these powers. But here, now, she wasn't the weak one. The humans were. And yet, they fought on, refusing to surrender. She could not let them die like this. A Xilari warrior turned toward her, his golden eyes glowing as he reached out with his mind. Risa felt the pressure immediately. A force surrounded her, crushing, suffocating, an invisible hand trying to squeeze the life from her body. No, not this time. Something inside her snapped. A pulse of energy exploded from her body, shattering the Xilari warrior's psionic grip. He stumbled back, his glowing eyes wide with shock. The other Xilari turned, sensing something impossible. A nullification field. Risa could block psionics. The realization hit her as hard as it hit them. She wasn't useless. She was the very thing the Xilari feared. A warrior without psionic power, immune to their greatest weapon. The battlefield shifted. Xilari warriors who had once used their psionic dominance as a shield now realized that against Risa, they had no advantage. She charged forward, engaging in battle with nothing but the strength of her body and her training. She dodged an attack, slammed her fist into an enemy's ribs, and took down another with a precise kick. Around her, the humans rallied, seeing the Xilari fighting on their side. And winning gave them new strength. Elias fought beside her, his rifle taking down enemy after enemy. "I knew there was something special about you," he said with a grin. Risa didn't have time to answer. The Xilari warlord leading the attack had stepped forward. Unlike the others, he was larger, stronger, and his psionic aura burned like a sun. "You are a disgrace," He spat at her. A failure of our species. I will erase your existence. Risa met his glare with fire in her eyes. No, she said, her voice steady. I am not the failure. You are. The warlord struck first, but his powers did not touch her. His psionic force shattered against her, useless. For the first time, he felt fear. She attacked, moving with human precision and auxiliary speed. The fight was brutal, but in the end, she stood over the fallen warlord, her breathing heavy, her body aching, but victorious. The remaining auxiliary forces, seeing their leader defeated and their greatest weapon nullified, fled. The battle was won. And Risa, she was no longer the useless daughter of a warlord. She was something new, a warrior, a legend. And this was only the beginning. The battlefield was silent. The once mighty auxiliary forces had fled, their warlord lying unconscious at Risa's feet. Around her, human soldiers caught their breath, their eyes filled with a mix of awe and exhaustion. Risa herself was still processing what had just happened. She had won. Not because of psionics, not because of noble blood. She had fought and won as a warrior. Elias stepped forward, his rifle slung over his shoulder. He studied the fallen Silari warlord, then looked at Risa with something close to admiration. Well, he said with a small grin, I'd say you just made history. Risa exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on her. For years, she had been told she was nothing. But now, she had done something no auxiliary had ever done. She had broken their power. The humans started gathering the wounded and securing the battlefield. Even though they had won, the cost had been high. Many lives were lost. The auxiliary would return, sooner or later. Elias placed a hand on Risa's shoulder. Come on, let's get back to the Valkyrie. We have a lot to talk about. Back aboard the Valkyrie, the crew gathered in the command room. Holograms displayed the damage to the human outpost, the casualties, and the auxiliary fleet's retreat path. Elias stood at the center, arms crossed. They weren't just attacking that outpost. This was personal. Its sharp blue eyes locked onto Risa. They came for you. She swallowed hard. She had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed sent a cold shiver through her. They want to erase you, Elias continued, because of what you did down there. Risa clenched her fists. She wasn't just an exile anymore. She was a threat to them. A young officer, Lieutenant Harris, shook his head. I don't get it. The auxiliary are some of the most powerful psionics in the galaxy. Why are they so afraid of her? Silence filled the room. Then, the ship's chief medic, Dr. Lynn Carter, spoke up. Because she can resist them. All eyes turned to her. Dr. Carter walked over to Risa, scanning her with a small medical device. I ran some tests after the battle. Your body reacts to psionic energy differently. It doesn't just block it, it repels it. That's why their attacks didn't work on you. Risa's heart pounded. A natural immunity to psionics. That was unheard of. Even among humans, psionic-resistant individuals were rare, but for auxiliary to have it, it was impossible. Except, it wasn't. Ayaz ran a hand through his short-cropped hair. That explains why your father wanted to get rid of you. Risa froze. He continued, his voice calm but firm. Lord Sealer must have known. Maybe not when you were born, but later. The Dominion controls its people through psionics. If the nobles found out that the great warlord's daughter was immune, it would have been a disaster. Risa looked down, her mind racing. Had her father always known? Had he truly thought she was worthless, or had he feared what she represented? Auxiliary immune to psionic control would be dangerous. Auxiliary who could fight back would be unstoppable. She clenched her jaw. The auxiliary Dominion had cast her aside, called her useless. But now, they were hunting her because they knew the truth. She was their greatest weakness. Elias folded his arms. The question is, what do we do now? Lieutenant Harris hesitated. Should we take her somewhere safe? Maybe hide her. No, Rice's voice was firm. The room turned to her in surprise. She took a deep breath and straightened her shoulders. I've spent my whole life running, hiding, being told what I can't do. I won't run anymore. Elias's eyes gleamed with approval. Good answer. Dr. Carter gave a small nod. There's something else, she added. If we study Rice's ability, we might be able to develop a defense against Scifi Chionics. Maybe even train others to resist them. That idea sent a ripple of excitement through the crew. Humans had fought the Scifi for years, always at a disadvantage. But now, they might have a way to fight back. Elias turned to Risa. You started something today. The Dominion won't stop coming for you, but if you're willing, we can make sure that when they do, they regret it. Risa exhaled slowly. Fear and uncertainty still lingered in her heart, but beneath them was something stronger. Determination. For the first time in her life, she had a purpose. She met Elias's gaze. I'm ready. He grinned. Then let's get to work. And with that, the legend of Risa, the Null Warrior, truly began. The Valkyrie moved through the cold emptiness of space, its engines humming softly. Inside the ship, Risa stood in the training bay, breathing heavily, sweat dripping from her forehead. Across from her, Elias stood with his arms crossed, watching her carefully. Again, he ordered. Risa tightened her grip on the training staff in her hands. She had been training harder than ever, pushing herself beyond her limits. Now that she knew the truth about her immunity to psionics, she couldn't afford to be weak. She lunged forward, swinging her staff at Elias. He blocked it easily, twisting his body and countering with a quick strike of his own. Risa barely managed to dodge, rolling to the side before launching another attack. Elias smiled slightly. Better. But in the next second, he swept her legs out from under her. She hit the ground with a grunt, frustration bubbling in her chest. Elias offered her a hand. You're improving, but you're still thinking too much. Instinct. Risa. Trust it. She took his hand and stood up, breathing hard. I'm trying. I know what he said, and I also know you're being too hard on yourself. She frowned, looking away. I don't have a choice. The Scifi will come for me again. Next time, I have to be ready. Elias studied her for a moment, then sighed. Come with me. A few minutes later, Risa stood on the Valkyrie's bridge, staring at the holographic display in front of her. It showed a large fleet of Scifi warships moving toward human-controlled space. They're coming, Elias said. Not just for you, for all of us. Her chest tightened. The Scifi weren't just hunting her anymore. They were preparing for war. Lieutenant Harris spoke up. We intercepted their transmissions. The Dominion sees Risa as a corrupt influence, a threat to their rule. They believe that if their people hear about her, it could cause a rebellion. Elias nodded. And they're right. If the Scifi people find out that one of their own is immune to psionics, it could shatter their belief that psionic power is absolute. The Dominion won't allow that. Risa's hands clenched into fists. All her life, she had been treated as worthless, cast aside because she was weak. But now, the Dominion feared her. They feared what she represented. Elias turned to her. We can't stop them alone. We need allies. Risa frowned. Who would help us? Other species that Scifi have oppressed, and maybe even some of their own people. Her eyes widened. You mean Scifi who want to fight against the Dominion? It's possible, Elias said. Not all Scifi are loyal to the Dominion. Some might be willing to join us if they see there's another way. Risa exhaled slowly. It was a risky plan, but it made sense. The Scifi ruled through fear and power. But what if that power no longer worked? She looked at Elias, her determination hardening. Then we need to find them. Before the war begins. Elias grinned. That's what I wanted to hear. The Valkyrie jumped into hyperspace, heading toward a remote planet on the edge of Scifi-controlled space. It was called Braxis, home to one of the oldest Xilari colonies. Unlike other Dominion planets, Draxus was known for its unrest. There had been whispers of rebellion for years. As the ship landed in a hidden canyon, Rissa felt her heart pounding. If they were right, then somewhere on this planet, there were Xilari who had already begun resisting the Dominion. The moment the ramp lowered, Elias, Rissa, and a small group of human soldiers stepped out, weapons ready. The air was dry and hot, and the sky above them was dark with storm clouds. A voice echoed through the canyon. "You shouldn't have come here, humans." Rissa turned toward the source of the voice, and her breath caught. Standing on a rock ledge above them was a Xilari warrior, but he wasn't wearing the sleek armor of the Dominion. His clothes were rough, his eyes sharp with suspicion. Elias took a step forward. "We're here to talk." The warrior's gaze landed on Rissa. His expression flickered with surprise, then narrowed. "A Xilari, with humans." Rissa met his gaze, stepping forward. "I'm not with the Dominion. I'm against them." The warrior studied her for a long moment. Then he leaped down from the ledge, landing smoothly in front of them. His silver eyes burned with intensity. "If that's true," he said slowly, "then you have a lot to prove." Rissa straightened. "Then tell me how." The warrior's lips curled into a small smile. "Fight with us." Her heart pounded. This was it, the first step in something bigger than herself. She nodded. "Then let's begin." And just like that, the storm of rebellion had started. The wind howled through the canyon as Rissa stood face to face with the Xilari warrior. His silver eyes studied her carefully, as if searching for weakness. Around them, more figures emerged from the shadows. Xilari rebels, their armor mismatched and worn, but their stances strong. Elias kept his hand close to his weapon, his soldiers tense behind him. "We didn't come here to fight," he said. "We came to offer something better." The warrior crossed his arms. "And why should we trust humans? The Dominion says you are invaders, enemies of the Xilari people." Rissa stepped forward. "The Dominion lies." The warrior's eyes flickered with something. Curiosity, perhaps. She took a deep breath. "They told me I was worthless because I had no psionic power. They cast me out, gave me to a human, as if I was nothing." She raised her chin. "But I fought. I survived. And now the Dominion fears me." The Xilari rebels exchanged glances. Whispers moved through their ranks. The warrior's gaze narrowed. "You are the one they call Null Warrior. The one the Dominion hunts." Rissa nodded. "They want to silence me because they know the truth. Psionic power does not make them invincible." The warrior was silent for a moment. Then he turned and motioned for them to follow. "Come, there is someone you must meet." Rissa and Elias followed the Xilari warriors deep into the canyon. They entered a hidden base carved into the rocks, where more rebels moved about, repairing weapons, studying maps, preparing for battle. Inside the largest chamber, an older Xilari stood waiting. His presence was different from the others. He had scars across his face, and his eyes held wisdom and pain. The warrior who had brought them bowed slightly. "This is Commander Zareth, leader of the Draxus resistance." Zareth stepped forward, his gaze sharp. "You have made quite an enemy of the Dominion, Null Warrior." Rissa met his eyes. "And so have you." A small smile touched his lips. "Indeed." Elias crossed his arms. "We're here because we want the same thing, to bring down the Dominion." Zareth studied him, then looked at Rissa. "And what do you want?" She took a deep breath. "I want to fight, not just for myself, but for those who have been crushed by the Dominion's rule. Xilari, humans, all of us, together, we can break their power." Zareth was quiet. Then he nodded slowly. "There may be hope in you after all." For the next few days, Rissa trained with the Xilari rebels. They were fierce warriors, but they had never fought without relying on psionic abilities. She showed them how to fight differently, how to use speed, tactics, and strategy instead of mind-based attacks. At first, they struggled. But soon, they adapted. They learned. And Rissa realized something important. The Xilari were not invincible, but neither were humans. Together, they could become something stronger. One evening, as she rested after a long training session, Elias sat beside her. "You're making a difference," he said. She exhaled, staring at the fire in front of them. "It's strange. I spent my whole life believing I was nothing. Now, people are looking to me for leadership." Elias smirked. "That's because you are a leader, whether you believe it or not." Rissa hesitated, then nodded. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for a future where no one had to feel as she once did. Weak, powerless, alone. But before she could say more, an alarm blared through the base. A scout ran into the camp, breathing hard. "Commander Zoreth, the Dominion fleet. They're coming." The camp erupted into motion. Soldiers grabbed weapons, preparing for battle. Rissa felt her heart race. Zoreth turned to them, his expression grim. "They must have tracked your ship." Elias cursed under his breath. "We need to move. Now." Rissa clenched her fists. She had wanted a fight. Now it had come to her. She took a deep breath, then looked at Zoreth. "This is it. If we fight together, we can win." Zoreth studied her, then nodded. "Then let us show the Dominion that their rule is not absolute." Rissa turned to the sky, where the first Xilari warships began descending. The battle for Draxus had begun. The sky above Draxus burned with fire as Xilari warships descended, their sleek forms cutting through the clouds like blades. The ground trembled as enemy drop pods crashed into the canyon, spilling out squads of Dominion soldiers. Their psionic energy crackled through the air, a terrifying display of power. Rissa stood at the front of the resistance fighters, gripping her weapon tightly. She could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. This was it, the battle that would decide everything. Elias loaded his rifle beside her, his expression grim but determined. "You ready for this?" She exhaled sharply. "No, but I'll fight anyway." Elias smirked. "That's the spirit." Commander Zoreth stood with them, his Xilari rebels prepared for war. "The Dominion believes they can crush us easily," he said. "We will prove them wrong." A deep horn echoed through the canyon, the signal to attack. Rissa raised her hand. "For freedom. Charge." The rebels and human soldiers roared as they surged forward, meeting the Dominion troops head-on. The battlefield was chaos. Dominion soldiers unleashed devastating psionic blasts, sending waves of energy at the resistance fighters. But this time, they were ready. The Xilari rebels, trained by Rissa, dodged and countered, striking before the Dominion soldiers could focus their power. Human snipers took out high-ranking officers, disrupting enemy coordination. Rissa fought like a storm, moving between enemies with precision and speed. A Dominion warrior swung a glowing psionic blade at her, but she ducked under it, driving her staff into his chest. He collapsed, stunned by the sheer force of a non-psionic attack. Elias covered her from a distance, his rifle firing in rapid bursts. "Keep moving. Don't let them regroup." Commander Zoreth and his rebels tore through the Dominion ranks, using their new combat skills to overwhelm their former oppressors. But then the air shifted. A chilling presence filled the battlefield. From the largest Dominion warship, a figure descended, a High Lord of the Dominion. His armor gleamed, his psionic aura pulsing with unimaginable power. The battlefield seemed to freeze as he landed, his glowing eyes scanning the rebels with cold contempt. His gaze locked onto Rissa. "So," he said, his voice echoing with power, "the disgrace of our people still lives." Rissa clenched her fists. She knew him. Lord Veros, one of the Dominion's greatest warlords, her father's most loyal general. He took a step forward, the ground cracking beneath him. "You should have stayed in exile, child." Rissa tightened her grip on her weapon. I am not a child, and I am not yours to control. Veros smiled cruelly. You cannot escape what you are. You are weak. You have always been weak. Risa took a deep breath, steadying herself. No, she said firmly. I am stronger than you ever knew. Veros raised a hand, his psionic energy surging. Then let us end this farce. The battle around them continued, but Risa only focused on Veros. He launched a wave of psionic force at her, strong enough to crush metal. She stood her ground. The energy hit her, but instead of breaking her, it shattered around her, repelled by her very existence. The ground beneath her cracked, but she remained standing, untouched. Veros' eyes widened in shock. Impossible. Risa smirked. Not impossible. Just something the Dominion never wanted to believe. She rushed forward, her staff swinging. Veros blocked it with his psionic shield, but he was slower now. He had always relied on his power. Without it, he was vulnerable. She pressed the attack, dodging his attempts to strike back. Her movements were fluid, precise, every strike landing where it hurt the most. Veros growled in frustration. You think you can defeat me? I am. Crack. Rice's final blow sent him sprawling to the ground. He gasped for breath, his psionic aura flickering weakly. She stood over him, her weapon raised. Veros looked up at her, his expression unreadable. You are a mistake. Rice's grip tightened. No, she said. I am the future. She turned away, leaving him where he lay. The rest of the Dominion soldiers, seeing their strongest warrior defeated, began to retreat. Their confidence shattered, they fled back to their ships. The resistance fighters let out a victorious cheer. Commander Zareth approached Risa, his expression filled with pride. You have done what none of us thought possible. Elias clapped a hand on her shoulder. Not bad. Legend. Risa exhaled, looking around at the rebels, the humans, and the battlefield that had changed everything. The Dominion was not gone. The war was not over. But the first battle had been won. And with it, a new hope had been born.